It started as an ordinary evening in Texas. A quiet street, a home filled with unspoken tension, and a man standing at the edge of a life-changing decision. He had made a choice, one that would set off a chain of events no one could have predicted. He was ready to turn back the clock, to mend what was broken, to walk away from the life he had built and return to the one he left behind. But that decision would be his last. Inside that house, beyond the walls that had witnessed love, arguments, and whispered regrets, something else was unfolding. A moment of silence before the storm. A heartbeat before everything changed. The kind of silence that holds its breath, waiting, knowing that what happens next cannot be undone. What came after would leave a man dead, a woman in handcuffs, and an entire community asking, why? Before we continue, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a case like this. Every story has layers, hidden truths, shocking twists, and moments that change everything in an instant. Now, let's go back to the night it all happened. A warm Texas night. The kind of night where the air hangs heavy, where the distant hum of passing cars fades into the quiet of suburban streets. Inside one home, a man sits alone, deep in thought. His life, his choices, everything leading him to this moment. He has made a decision, one that will change everything. A decision to go back, to start over, to mend what was broken with the woman he once vowed to love forever. But love is never simple. Promises are never unbreakable. And some decisions come with consequences. He wasn't alone in that house. Just down the hall, another woman, his wife, carrying his child, moves through the silence. She knows. She has seen the distance in his eyes and heard the hesitation in his voice. A woman knows when something is slipping away, and when a man makes a choice to walk back to his past. Not everyone is willing to let him go. What happened in the next few hours would leave one life extinguished and another forever changed. But before the blood was spilled, before the police sirens cut through the night, there was a story of love, betrayal, and a breaking point that no one saw coming. It began with words, soft at first, then sharp, then something more, something charged, edged with finality. A man standing in his own living room, telling the woman he once vowed to love that he was leaving. Not for another woman, not in the way people usually expect, but for someone from his past. Someone who had once held his heart and, if he had his way, would again. For his wife, those words weren't just an announcement. They weren't a discussion. They were something else. A door slamming shut, a knife cutting through the very fabric of the life she had built around him. And yet, there was still time, still space, to change his mind, to make him see what was slipping through his fingers. She pleaded. She reasoned. She reminded him of the child she carried. But he had already made up his mind. The tension in the air was thick. Neighbors would later say they heard voices rising and falling, the unmistakable sound of anger giving way to something raw. A man's voice, steady. A woman's, desperate. Then a sudden crash, something heavy hitting the floor. But what happened inside those walls, in the next few moments, no one saw? Did she leave the room, hands trembling, heart pounding? Did she press her fingers to her temples, trying to force herself to think? Or did she stand there, rooted in place, the weight of his words settling into her bones? Maybe she turned to the kitchen without realizing it, her body moving before her mind caught up. Maybe her fingers curled around the handle of the knife without truly deciding to. Maybe it wasn't a decision at all. Or maybe it was. What is known, what no one can argue, is that at some point the distance between them closed, that the argument, which had once been about words, became something entirely else, that in the space of mere seconds a life was taken. The knife entered once, twice, 3 times, maybe more. The exact number wouldn't be known until later, when the coroner's report revealed the full extent of the damage. But by the time the blade was still, there was no undoing what had been done. The house was silent again, except for her breathing, shallow, uneven, except for the distant hum of traffic outside, cars passing by unaware of what had just taken place behind those walls. The scent of copper filled the air. Blood pooled across the floor, dark against the soft glow of the living room lamp. He was gone, and she was still standing. By the time the first knock came at the door, the weight of what had happened had settled. The police were on the other side. She had a choice: run or stay. But there was something the officers outside didn't know, something they hadn't prepared for. Because when they stepped inside, when their eyes scanned the room, when they took in the scene before them, there was one detail that made everything even more disturbing. The call came in just after 11 p.m. A woman's voice, shaking, uneven, words tumbling over each other. The dispatcher tried to keep her calm, but there was something in her tone, something just beneath the surface. Fear? Shock? Or something else entirely? "He's bleeding. Oh my God, there's so much blood." When officers arrived, the house was quiet. Too quiet. The kind of silence that only follows something irreversible. They stepped inside, their eyes sweeping the room, taking in the scene. A man collapsed on the floor, motionless, blood smeared across the hardwood, and standing just feet away, his pregnant wife, her hands still stained red. Her expression? Emotionless. Or was it a shock? Officers called out to her, but for a moment, she didn't speak, didn't move. Then, finally, a whisper. It wasn't supposed to happen like this. They secured the scene, marking the pool of blood, the overturned furniture, and the knife resting just beyond her reach. A single weapon, but multiple wounds. That was the first detail that didn't sit right with detectives. A crime of passion. A single fatal strike in the heat of the moment? That would make sense. But this was different. As the forensic team moved in, the pieces of the crime began to take shape. Blood spatter told a story. The positioning of the wounds told another. And then there was her version. The story she gave them. Self-defense. He had lunged at her, she claimed. She grabbed the knife in desperation, trying to protect herself. It was an accident. It wasn't supposed to happen. But evidence doesn't lie. The autopsy would later confirm what detectives already suspected. He hadn't been stabbed just once. Not twice. Multiple times. And not just in the front. Some of the wounds were in his back. And then came the messages, the digital trail that painted a picture far more unsettling than the one she told police. Hours before the attack, she had sent texts to a close friend. Messages filled with anger. Messages that hinted at what she was thinking. Messages that suggested. She had known exactly what she was going to do long before she ever picked up that knife. At first, detectives considered the possibility of premeditation. Had she planned this? Had she waited for the right moment, knowing full well what she was about to do? Or had something snapped in that instant, turning a heated argument into an irreversible act of violence? It was a question that would determine everything. But before detectives could draw their final conclusion, there was one last discovery. A detail hidden in the background, waiting to be uncovered. And once they found it, it changed the entire investigation. As the case moved to trial, the courtroom was packed. Journalists, family members, legal experts, everyone was waiting to hear the truth. The prosecution wasted no time painting a chilling picture. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't self-defense. This was rage. A deliberate act fueled by jealousy and betrayal. They laid out their evidence carefully. The multiple stab wounds, the autopsy report proving that some of them were inflicted as he tried to turn away. The text messages sent hours before the crime, hinting at what was to come. And then, the biggest piece of all, the forensic analysis. The crime scene told a story, and it didn't match hers. But the defense had its own argument. They claimed she wasn't thinking clearly, that she acted out of fear, not malice, that the stress of pregnancy, the emotional turmoil of her husband's betrayal, and the overwhelming sense of abandonment pushed her beyond reason. They called it a crime of passion, temporary insanity, not murder. Witnesses took the stand. Friends spoke about the couple's troubled marriage. Family members described her emotional state in the days leading up to the crime. And then came a moment no one expected. The victim's former wife was called to testify. She described the phone call she had with him just hours before his death. His words, his excitement about the future, his certainty that he was making the right decision. That testimony was devastating. The jury deliberated for hours, and then, finally, the verdict came in. Guilty. The sentence? A lengthy prison term. Decades behind bars, with the possibility of parole far in the future. A child born behind prison walls, growing up without a father, and barely knowing a mother. A life destroyed. A moment of rage that could never be undone. But even after the case was closed, questions remained. Had there been signs before? A history of violence that had gone unreported? Had this outcome been inevitable the moment she realized he was leaving? And one question that haunts many to this day. If he had never told her? If he had waited just one more night? Would he still be alive? A man's life was taken in a moment of violence, sparked by a decision to reconnect with his past. But was that moment of rage enough to justify the tragic end that followed? Was this a crime of passion, driven by raw emotion, or was it something darker, something calculated and premeditated? And as the legal system passed its judgment, the question remains, was justice truly served? What do you think? Was this a crime of passion, a spontaneous act driven by heartbreak, or was it cold, calculated, and premeditated? Could the pregnancy have influenced her actions, or even the sentence she received? Was there more to this than meets the eye? I want to hear your thoughts. Drop your comments below. Do you believe the right verdict was reached? Or is there more to the story we may never know? If you're fascinated by this case and want to see more gripping true crime stories like this, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and turn on notifications. We've got more stories coming that you won't want to miss. Thanks for watching, and be sure to join us again next time for more real-life mysteries.